This happened during the summer of 2015. I had just graduated high school, and I still lived in my hometown at that time. I was out with some friends, and it was getting really late in the evening, around 1 a.m. or so. I decided it was around time to head home. First, though, I had to stop by a drugstore close to my house that was 24/7 to pick up some aspirin and snacks. The one I went to was in the same parking lot as a supermarket, which is important. I parked my car as close to the store as possible. It was quite empty, so there were no more than 2 other cars in this giant lot. I was nowhere near either of them. I headed in and grabbed what I came to get very quickly. I just had this overwhelming feeling of dread the whole time, for seemingly no reason. I felt like someone was constantly watching me, but when I looked around, I couldn't see anyone else there. Well, besides me and the cashier. After I had gotten everything I intended to buy, I stalled checking out for a bit. I went aisle by aisle, looking at random things. I thought, just in case, whoever was out there would surely get bored and leave if I took too long looking around. Really though, the whole time I thought I was just being paranoid. I wasn't used to going out so late, so surely that must be it. After about 20 minutes of that wandering around, I paid for my items and left the store. I got to the door and literally bolted to my car, pepper spray in hand. I locked myself in immediately. I turned my head to check the back seat. Just before I was about to breathe a sigh of relief because no one really was there, I heard a sudden tapping on my window. I looked around before I'd left the store near the entrance, and I'd seen that no one was nearby, so how had I not seen whoever was tapping out there? Of course, this really freaked me out. I don't know if this person was Ted Bundy inspired or what, but this was quite an odd occurrence. I looked up to see a very handsome blonde man with slightly long hair and a big cast on his arm. My first instinct was to drive off immediately, but this man was leaning on the front hood part of my car. I didn't want to just run him over and get in trouble or something, so I rolled my window down just an inch. I called out to him and asked him to maybe back up just a bit so I could drive off without hitting him, but no, he stayed glued to my car. The man then asked me if I could help him with directions and to look up an address for him. I really need to go right now, sir. Maybe you can ask the person in the drugstore and they can help. I already went to the supermarket and they said they couldn't do anything. Well, that was a big mistake. I knew that place closed at exactly 8 p.m. There was no way this guy had just been lurking around for 5 whole hours, waiting for some random girl's help. He then went on and on about feeling really tired. If I could just give him some water or food I'd bought since he had no money, that would be a great help. I told him okay and began to reach to my passenger side to grab the chips I had bought. I started to roll the window down slightly, and like I expected, he moved closer to my window. It was all part of my plan though. Now he was off the hood of my car. I slammed on the gas. He chased my car as it started to pull out, and I heard a scraping sound on the side as I pulled away. I didn't drive directly home just in case I was followed. Instead, I drove down the highway for an hour. I was so distraught over what just happened. When I finally got home, the entire side of my car had been scraped from the door almost to the trunk. I'm pretty sure he used a knife or some other sharp object because it was a really rough scrape. Of course, I immediately reported the incident, but they never found that man or heard of any similar incidents in my town. He was watching me the entire time, perhaps from the windows of the store. How else would he have known I'd brought food with me? I think maybe he had hidden behind my car so I couldn't see him when I came out at first. I feel like he was trying to get me before I got in my car, but I was too scared and happened to get in too fast for him to act. So I have a pretty spooky story about something that happened to my ex-partner and I back in 2014. My partner and I decided she was going to go on birth control and made an appointment with the OBGYN at our university student health services. I took her in and she went to her appointment. I waited in the waiting room. She came back out and we left. Fairly standard so far. While in there though, I noticed the man at the front desk kept staring at me, then darting away whenever I would make eye contact. Fast forward to the next evening. My partner and I were having dinner together at about 8 p.m. when her phone suddenly rang. She answered, only to realize it was the man from the front desk at the Student Health Services office. He introduced himself as such as well. He went on to tell her that her STD tests had all come back clean. This is mandatory before you go on birth control, which was odd because usually they just put that info online in a secure portal. He then started asking about her sexual history and how many partners she'd had. Although she was uncomfortable answering this, she did so, thinking obviously that the front desk guy was asking for more information for the doctor. He then asked if the person she was with was her husband. When she said, "No, it's my boyfriend," he immediately pounced. He said something along the lines of, "Well, I think you're so beautiful and clean. I'll treat you better than him. In fact, I'll come over to your apartment right now." Startled and confused, she said, "Wait, what? Excuse me, that's inappropriate. Please let me talk to the doctor instead." "Oh, I'm not at the office. It's closed right now. I'm calling you from my cell phone." "Well, how did you get my phone number? I never gave it to you." "Oh, I know. It was in your file. I thought you were so beautiful that I added it to my phone, after I saw you had no STDs, of course. Also, I saw your address was near mine, so I'm thinking about coming over. Don't worry about your boyfriend, though. I can take care of him. I can come over right now if you'd like." She hung up the phone immediately, and we called the police and filed a report. I spent the entire night looking at the front door with a baseball bat in hand. The very next day, we ended up starting a case with the school because it was student health services. They tried apologizing at first and saying he was just new, but we were very firm that this was not just ignorance. We called the dean of the health department and told them what happened and that we were going to file a lawsuit. Needless to say, he was immediately fired and expelled from the school as well. Since he was an international student, this also meant he had to leave the country. Because we didn't want to cost our school money and they acted swiftly about the issue, we didn't pursue further legal action after. So, as a law enforcement ranger for 30 seasons or so, I've seen some dumbass shit in the woods and some scary shit as well. My very worst experience was chasing down a man who had escaped from a mental treatment facility. Now, if he was just camping out in the deep woods, I wouldn't have had any issue with him, but he was routinely stealing the gusset out of women and girl swimsuits left to dry on lines in the campground and Girl Scout areas. The gusset, by the way, I'm told is the cotton part of a suit that touches the outer labia and skin. It's like a soft cotton cloth sewn for hygienic reasons, or so I was told. One of the Girl Scouts' moms came sprinting up to me as I was out on patrol and told me she had seen a man run off on foot from the clotheslines. Immediately, I started to give chase. This was in the days before our handheld radios could transmit further than the back of the truck, so I had one of the older girls go make a notification to my office. Like a dumbass, I took off running on the horse trail where I could see the man's fresh prints on the ground. I'd sprinted about 2 miles or so into the wilderness when I found a makeshift tent and campground setup. I also found various bundles of cords and a linoleum knife and tape, along with Ziploc gallon-sized bags full of these gussets. Clearly, our thief was headed in a new direction. I was convinced that the man was planning an abduction. My guy came sprinting out of the woods, so I drew my service sidearm on him, and we had a very awkward walk back. I had him handcuffed and in leg irons as well, with a leash drag so I could trip him by stepping on it if needed. I also made sure to make him sing the Star-Spangled Banner to keep him out of breath if he decided to fight me. When you're that deep into the woods and unsure if you have help coming at all, you need every advantage you can get. Luckily, my backup met us on the trail, and we were able to properly handcuff our prisoner in the bed of the pickup for the ride back to the office. I had to sit in the bed with him for the trip. He wasn't much of a chatter, though he did have a mean stare. The guys went back and cleaned out the site. He had been there for a while, and from what was left behind, he was definitely a bit of a time bomb. Since he wasn't mentally well, though, we didn't pursue anything criminal. He was committed to someplace in Ulster County, New York at a maximum security psych facility, though, until his death sometime later. I used to put money on his commissary every now and then, but I doubt he even remembered who I was. "3 years ago, I was hunting in Namaji State Forest in Minnesota. If you know anything about this area, you know there are wetlands everywhere. Swamps and sinkholes litter the land, and it's like nothing you've probably ever seen. The land is very tough and mean, so if you go in unplanned and don't mark your way out, there's a good chance no one will ever see you again. This day was a very foggy morning, and the second week of deer opener. I was trailing along and had my rifle across my chest, with both hands on the scope. I was simply trying to find an area where I could see more than 10 feet in front of me. The further I got in, though, I began to realize I was completely lost. Then the oh shit set in. I walked a bit further ahead, trying to get my bearings. Before I knew it, I stepped forward and just sunk immediately. Suddenly, I was up to my forehead in mud and sinking further. My only anchor being my rifle butt and barrel, which just so happened to be wider than the sinkhole I'd managed to fall into. My only hope was to pull myself out. Well, it turned out I was not strong enough for that. I tried for 4.5 hours, screaming my lungs off for help and trying in vain to pull myself out of my hole. Every time I would lift up a bit, my rifle would sink in lower and lower. I had to try and jump to yell and get a breath of air when I was completely submerged in mud and sludge. After 5 hours of this, I came to terms that I was probably not going to get out. I was going to die alone in this sinkhole, and no one would ever find me. I thought about my wife and my mom, how much it would hurt them to never hear from me again and go the rest of their lives not knowing what had happened to me. I thought about my 2 girls and how I had likely wasted my life on a simple hunting trip. I was never going to be there for them anymore. At that point, I must have looked like Leonardo DiCaprio from The Revenant crawling through the snow. I was cursing and praying, and cursing more with my very last bit of energy to try and get out. I thought at least if I was going to die anyway, I was going to make damn sure I used up every fiber in my being before I entombed myself in this literal hellhole. Again though, no luck. I felt this sudden feeling of euphoria just rush throughout my body. I was sad but happy at the same time. I understood that was the last of my strength. My body was now broken, and it was my time to go. I felt hypothermia begin to set in, when out of nowhere I felt 2 pairs of hands grab my hands and start pulling me out of that sinkhole. Like a miracle, a father and son had tracked a deer that they'd happened to shoot within 5 feet of where I'd sunk. To this day, I feel like that deer was a guardian angel or something. Its life was ended, and I was reborn and given a second chance. After a week in the hospital recovering from dehydration, hypothermia, and the ass beating I'd given myself trying to get out, I walked out of there, promising to never take a second for granted again. It's made me a far better father to my children, and a better man in general, I truly believe. Sometimes at night I still wake up screaming, trying to pull myself out from sinking deeper and deeper into a non-existent hole, covered in sweat with my heart pounding. When I do, I go check on my now 3 girls, and I think to myself how lucky I am to still be alive. Lastly, I've given up on hunting altogether, or even going into deep woods really. Maybe one day I'll try again, but every time I think about it, I start shaking, even writing this has me in tears. On a side note, a man from the Twin Cities this last hunting season disappeared in that very same area I was hunting in. Look it up if you don't believe me. Every time I see his face on the news or in the paper, I just imagine him in my head, struggling to get out. Unfortunately for him though, nobody was around to help him. So after reading a few posts on here, I've decided to add one of the creepier, still unexplained events that happened to me and a group of friends within the past 5 years. Thinking back on it even, I still get this unnerved bad feeling that sort of lingers. Anyway, here goes. A group of friends and myself rented a place on a lake for a fun-filled, drunken weekend. We were all in our young to mid-20s, and it was supposed to be just a big party. For the most part, that's actually what it was. Friday night and Saturday morning, we went all out having a blast on the water and doing fun, stupid stuff. Naturally, when Sunday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going all out, we decided it would be a night of no drinking. Perhaps only a little bit of weed smoking by some of us. Instead, we'd kind of just have a chill evening and night. Because of this, the atmosphere was very relaxed. 9 p.m. comes rolling around, and about 8 of us were inside the house. 5 were outside. The house was a 2-story with a 2nd-story deck/back porch. It was surrounded by woods. If you walked out through those woods, you would eventually hit the lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived in town. Mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assume were leering and irritated because we were college-age kids looking to have a good time. The town and the lake were so large though, so it's not like anyone knew exactly where we were staying at. Anyway, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch, and my other friend and I were downstairs outside just talking on this little old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were getting lost in conversation when all of a sudden there was this weird feeling that suddenly encompassed us. It was like an unnerving physical experience that came from the woods behind us. It was so strong we both quieted down immediately. Out of nowhere, this loud chanting abruptly started to come from the woods. I had no idea how far away it was. Because of the way the lake was set up, I'm pretty sure the voices carried up and out through the forest. It sounded like a cult chanting away, and all of the voices seemed to be male. I mean, they were very loud and perfectly in sync. We all froze for about 20 seconds. I couldn't contain myself anymore, and darted toward the house with the others following me. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came with that chanting, but it was like a tangible evil, like something so powerfully uninviting. I was shaking by the time we got up to the 2nd story, and ran out onto the balcony with the other 3 friends. One of them was my brother. By the time we got up there, the chanting had stopped. Naturally, I asked, "Did you guys hear that?" in the most shaky, freaked out voice possible. They had, in fact, all heard it, and not seconds later after asking, the chanting began once again. The 5 of us are all out there peering into the forest, listening to this strange chanting. Sometimes it would sound really far away. Then it would get closer and closer until it was relatively close by. All male voices in the weirdest language I'd ever heard. I don't even know if it was a real language, to be honest. It sounded like some strange, extreme church chanting. Suddenly, we heard a loud bang, like someone had just struck a huge metal object. Then the worst part came. A man wailing. Like an extreme pain wailing. All of my hair stood up. It was the freakiest experience ever. My brother and I stared at each other in a mixture of scared excitement and horror. The wailing stopped abruptly. Then it went back to the chanting, which eventually died out altogether. I was so freaked out. I wanted to call the cops right away because whoever screamed surely must have been in a lot of pain. That mixed with the weird chanting made me think some terrible sacrifice was going on in these woods. One of my friends tried to say it had to be some drunk guys just messing around, singing and being weird, but I know there was no way that was coming from some drunk guys. They were all perfectly in sync. and that wail of pain, it was way too real. All of a sudden, it was like all that weird tension and energy just dissipated altogether. I didn't call the cops in the end. I wish I would have, but honestly the forest was so large anyway, and since the lake house was looking down at the woods and lake, it could have carried out from just about anywhere. It definitely wasn't in our close proximity, but it was close enough to be carried out by the shape of the landscape. We went in and grabbed some of the others, but by the time they came out, everything had stopped and didn't continue from then on. Someone wanted to go explore and find where it had been coming from, but obviously that was a very stupid idea and we didn't do that. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now, just thinking about it gives me the worst feeling. Whatever that was, it felt wrong and evil. I'll never forget that moment. I can only imagine it was some weird cult stuff going on. This happened earlier this week and it still freaks me out. I work at a hotel in my town and was driving my husband's truck into work. He was taking mine into the shop this day to get it serviced. He has a very large truck, and I only drive it when I absolutely have to. When I pulled into the side parking lot, I noticed the entire lot was covered in snow. No one could see the lines for the spots. So of course, I began like a moron to try and park in what I hoped was an actual spot, backing up and moving forward several times. When I finally did manage to park, I got out of the truck and grabbed my backpack. All of a sudden though, I could hear someone yelling from the sidewalk from behind the parking lot. "Hey, you need to learn how to fucking park." I was embarrassed, but just closed the truck, locked it, and began to walk to the front of the building. Now, the hotel had a side entrance for employees only. It took a code though, and I have a really shitty memory. Usually, I would just walk around to the front and go into the main entrance. All of a sudden, I could hear the guy yelling again. "Did you hear me, bitch?" I walked faster and took a peek behind me. I could see the man was now following me. I kept walking but called back. "Please leave me alone, sir. I need to get to work now." Before I could reach the corner of the building and make my way to the entrance though, the man sprinted to me and gripped my arm and spun me around. I'll never forget what this guy looked like for as long as I live. He wore dark clothes with a torn-up winter coat. His eyes were extremely bloodshot, and he smelled like a combination of cigarettes and whiskey. I guessed he must have been drunk, but he didn't slur at all when speaking. "You're coming with me now." The man began to drag me back to the truck, and I tried to pull away from him. "Give me the keys, we're taking a drive." I began to scream for help, and his grip on my arm got even tighter. I'm a 26-year-old woman and not skinny at all, but I was a lot smaller than this guy. He was dragging me away so easily, and the snow on the ground just made my feet slide along. I screamed out for help, but no one was around to hear us. I kept fighting to get away from this guy. I prayed there would be any guest that could possibly hear me. But it was our slow season, so most likely there would be no one in the rooms on that side of the building. The guy turned back to glare at me. "Shut the fuck up and give me the damn keys." Now, I was carrying my backpack on one shoulder. It was big and bulky from my uniform and shoes. I quickly slipped the strap down my arm, grabbed it, and swung it right into his face. The guy let go of me, and I ran for my life to the front doors. I could hear the man screaming behind me, but I ignored him. I was way too scared to look back now. I ran inside and all the way to the employee locker rooms. When I finally calmed down enough, I went to the front desk to talk to security. Sadly, there were no cameras on that side of the building, so none of this was recorded. They called the cops, and I did make a report though. The cops informed the general manager of the hotel that they needed to seriously consider security cameras on that side of the building, as drunks and druggies were known to be in this area. They got the description of the man and said they would keep an eye out for him. The manager apologized like crazy about the incident, but I told him it wasn't really his fault. He was a really good guy. I did ask security to follow me out so I could check on the truck though. Thankfully, it was fine. After that, the security guard promised to make more rounds outside, especially in the early morning. And that was about it in the end.